If I could ask all our all-star cast of panelists to turn on their camera, I will introduce everybody. Okay, so thanks so much for joining us this morning. Obviously, FinTech is a hugely hot area at the moment with so many transactions, so much new technology. It's an incredibly important part of the financial services sector. So this morning, I'd like to start by introducing Greg Moshal, who's the CEO of Prospa. Greg, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Sorry, everyone. I did the, there we go. You would have thought I would have learned that by now. So thanks, everyone. Look, Ali, thank you very much. Pat, thanks for hosting this with Creditor Watch. I think really exciting topic and also some great panelists. I'm looking forward to learning a few things myself today. I'm Greg Moshal. I'm a co-founder and CEO at Prospa. We were the first and leading of Australia's online business lenders. So we lend to small businesses. We offer both loans and line facilities. We're about 9 years in now. We've lent a bit north of $2 billion, helped over 30,000 customers, and are now a listed company as well.
Wow, a really important member of the FinTech sector. I'd now like to pass to Sam Kothari, who's the Director of Growth at Airwallex. Thank you very much for joining us this morning, Sam.
Thanks, Ali. Thanks, Pat. Thanks for hosting. Quick introduction. So, yeah, Sam, I'm Director of Growth at Airwallex. I look after the growth of our Australian business and our expansion into some new markets. Airwallex, it's a Melbourne-founded sort of Australian homegrown fintech. We're essentially a financial platform that's helping Australian businesses collect, hold, and convert funds in multiple different currencies and in multiple countries. Recently, we expanded into online payment processing as well as issuing virtual cards for our customers as well. And we just announced our Series E fundraising last week as well. So it's a $200 million round, which has been super exciting. So look, we're 6 years into the journey. Still a long way to go, but essentially looking to help and support businesses in Australia to scale internationally.
Congratulations so much on that huge raising. And I've just seen this morning another release come through with a couple of important new hires. So what's happening at Airwallex at the moment? I'd next like to introduce Hayley Fisher, who's the Country Manager for Adyen. Good morning, Hayley.
Good morning, Ali. How are you? Good to see you. And Pat, thank you so much for having me join. I'm Hayley Fisher. I'm the Country Manager for Australia and New Zealand at Adyen. And we are a global fintech. So we help merchants process and optimize their payments across in-store, online, and in-app via a modern end-to-end platform, which connects directly into the global card schemes, including Visa and MasterCard, and consumers' globally preferred payment methods. And the Australian team and I are very fortunate to work with Australian and New Zealand merchants to help them grow their businesses both locally and internationally.
Thanks so much for joining us, Hayley. And finally, Rebecca Schot-Guppy, CEO of FinTech Australia. Good morning, Rebecca.
Good morning, and thank you for having me here today. FinTech Australia is the peak advocacy body for Australian fintechs. We represent over 350 members, and we do three main things, Ali. We do policy and advocacy work, so we're working really closely with our members on CDR, the recent report by Scott Farrell on payments, and working on the Senate report for Senator Bragg. We do our connectivity arm, which is helping our members grow, whether that's connecting them with Austrade, each other, or our corporate partners. And lastly, we have our Grow arm, which is all about growing awareness of the sector. And we run two major events, being Finis and Intersect.
You've really got that helicopter view of the sector. So thank you so much for joining us this morning. So a little bit of housekeeping before we get into the discussion. Feel free to post your questions, which we will get to at the end of the discussion. So I'd like to start this morning by asking Patrick, how does Creditor Watch support the new fintech system?
Yeah, look, so it's an interesting one because fintech's always changing, right? You know, I think we can say it's new forever. There's always new products, new technology coming out, and I think that keeps us on our toes. We need to be able to make sure that we're providing some fairly sensitive information, whether it's, from a legislative perspective in terms of, AML and KYC, but also providing, credit risk information to ensure that, for lenders like Prospa, for example, that they're, providing money to, companies that are ultimately going to pay them back. I think the fintech space where it's very unique is, it's all about speed. We want to be able to support not only companies growing as fast as they have, and I think Sam talking about some of those numbers in the 6 years coming out of Melbourne is phenomenal, and it's not just the company growth, it's also about the decisions, the data and the analytics being provided at speed as well. So yeah, that's we're in the back end, we're always hidden, probably not spoken about a lot, but we've done a huge amount of work in this space, and it's great to see these in particular Aussie companies grow internationally and start to steal some of the headlines from the tech that we expect to see out of Silicon Valley.
And you play a super important role during COVID, giving businesses the confidence to trade with each other.
Yeah, that's right. I think there were plenty of businesses out there that have done it extremely tough. There are plenty that have done extremely well, and I think being able to connect those that need, whether it's services, funding, just to be a trade credit debtor or supplier, being able to provide that information and provide confidence at both ends of the transaction, has been a real success for us since day one, but particularly over the last 18 months.
So Patrick, I'd like to sort of deal with the big transaction first up, which is the Afterpay Square transaction earlier this year, which was obviously stunning and groundbreaking. Will we see more cross-pollination between fintechs across borders as well?
I think certainly, it's probably put a bit of a microscope or telescope, maybe it's better, on Australia and Australian, technology companies. We've had the obvious ones like Atlassian, and then of course, Canva's blown up as well, in particular this year, and garnered even more headlines. But yeah, I think naturally the world's starting to look to Australia, and fintech, we're certainly leaders with any other country in the world. But on top of that, I think what we'll also see is probably that cross-pollination, between, the existing banking system and fintechs as well. We've seen some acquisitions and investments over the years, including with the likes of Afterpay and Zip and other larger ones. And of course, that we've got the neobanks as well that are chomping away at the banks as well. So I think we're going to see some very big deals continue to happen in the future.
Why do you think that we punch above our weight in Australia, given that we're such a small country, but we seem to be really plugged into that global fintech system?
That's a good question. I think given that we had the Olympics this year, we could sort of link it back to there, and you see how well we do from a sporting achievement perspective, despite the fact that we've got 20-odd million population, and yet we're ranking so highly on the medal tally. I think it goes through to business and innovation and technology as well. Aussies being apart from the world, sort of just get on with it and do it for themselves, but they've also got those grand plans to expand overseas. So that's that small sort of mentality. I don't know, maybe it's small man syndrome. We're all a little bit angry, and we want to prove that we're not this tiny little country in the bottom of the Pacific somewhere.
I just think also, as a small player, it allows us to be a little bit more nimble and to challenge and to want to challenge those bigger markets. I think that plays into it as well. So a question for Hayley. Hayley, e-commerce has been hugely important during COVID, as we've all, shopped from home and been unable to get out and about. How do fintechs support e-commerce?
I think fintechs play a really important role in the payment system, as they're continuously challenging the system to adapt and find new ways to make payments even more efficient and seamless. And some of those emerging technologies include things like machine learning and the power of data. So at Adyen, we employ machine learning techniques to improve our risk and fraud solutions. And that means we can optimize the payment flow in real time. And that also means giving merchants rich data insights to basically a full and unified view of their consumers across channels. And I think we'll see a lot more emerging technologies progress from now.
It's a fascinating area. It's also a question that I'd like to pose to Sam. Wallets are really a new technology and a new part of the financial services system. What role will they play in the financial system in the future, and especially what's Airwallex's role in the future?
Yeah, and a great question. And I think the deal we talked about, the Square and Afterpay deal, right? Like I think a lot of people are talking about the Square Cash App and the role that that's playing right now for consumers in the US, and the really interesting ecosystem they've been able to build, you know, having both merchants and consumers on their platform. So I think confidence in fintechs from a consumer perspective is increasing, right? As we build better businesses and provide new solutions, that the confidence is there. I think that's also flowing into businesses as well. So I think businesses are becoming more comfortable here. And so, you know, I think as that confidence grows, people are going to be more comfortable with things like contactless payments, digital wallets, you know, online payment methods, you know, that are a little bit more efficient and faster. And there are some really interesting players internationally, like Gcash in the Philippines, KakaoPay in Korea, that are doing some really, I think, exciting things to kind of help the unbanked, you know, in different regions. So, you know, I think as that confidence continues to increase, we're going to see more penetration of these digital wallet solutions and you know, demand from merchants and consumers on both sides, you know, for fintechs to support those. I mean, we've seen that at Airwallex with, you know, over the last sort of, you know, 12 months, our revenue's grown sort of 150% year on year in just the first half of 2021. And we're supporting, you know, merchants to accept payments from local payment methods like Gcash and KakaoPay. So, you know, an Australian business here can sell to individuals or consumers in Southeast Asia and other regions, and I guess tap into that emerging market as well.
It's a real game changer for Australian businesses to be able to do that. What role do you think you play in sort of educating the market about that's what we can do now?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we're trying to do a lot more to shout about the opportunity, not just in Australia for businesses here, but also internationally, right? I think, you know, to Pat's point around, you know, the role that we've already played, you know, and the outsized role we're playing, you know, I think there's so much opportunity left for Australian businesses in Southeast Asia, in Europe, in the US, where we can, you know, really help businesses penetrate those regions, find new customers, build relationships with suppliers. That's something that you know, we're really passionate about. You know, our mission is to help businesses grow around the world, and I think that's something the sector has been talking about a lot about as well. Obviously, with COVID, there've been some challenges, you know, especially on the logistics side, you know, with supply chains. But you know, I think it's definitely continued to accelerate that access. We're seeing a lot of, you know, even e-commerce merchants that we support that are looking at US customers and US consumers and starting to bring their products into those regions as well.
You know, you talk about COVID challenges. I would imagine that demand for your services will explode once the borders open. Is that something that you're expecting?
Yeah, so we support a lot of e-commerce merchants and other businesses that have benefited, frankly, from COVID. You know, I think the key part or the key segment we've definitely seen that's taken a hit, I think that's obvious to everyone, is travel. And you know, we supply borderless multi-currency, you know, cards for businesses. So you know, when travel does kick off, you know, we're expecting, you know, a big uptick in spend, and you're very excited to support that, you know, in a cost-effective manner for businesses. But yeah, look, I think you know, personally, I'm ready to jump on a plane as soon as I'm allowed to. So you know, I think there's a lot of pent-up demand for you know, business and obviously personal travel as well.
Yeah, that's right. I think we're all, you know, really excited to start our traveling life again and take advantage of the services that businesses like yours offer. Rebecca, let's talk about neobanks. Where are we at with neobanks in the Australian market?
We're in a bit of a consolidation phase, Ali. So obviously we had 2 years ago, Zinger and Volt be the first two to receive an restricted ADI and then an ADI, followed by 86,400, and then our first neobank, which is actually a partnership between Bendigo and Ferocia up. And so what we've seen over the last 2 years is we've seen that, you know, you've got to offer a product that can actually generate revenue. So unfortunately, Zinger is no longer with us, and Volt has pivoted to more of a banking as a service platform. And we've seen actually 86,400 get some great traction in market and subsequently be acquired by NAB, which I think is a real positive for the market. And more recently, Bendigo's actually consumed Up, and Up's probably the bank with the most amount of traction. And more, and that, I'm sorry to go back a step, that was actually the 5th most downloaded banking app in the country at a point Up. So we were seeing some good traction in that space. But what is exciting is we're actually seeing companies now reverse engineer the neobanking space. And obviously we've had Revolut land. So I think it is a period for growth, but we've just gone through a bit of a consolidation phase, and we'll see companies reverse engineer it, actually go from lending products and then to become a neobank, so that they have the revenue generating stream before they go to offering transaction and deposit accounts, which we saw Zinger and Volt start off with. So I think we're seeing a change in the landscape, but I think we will see some growth in the sector.
Now, Revolut, correct me if I'm wrong, is a UK neobank that's come down here. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's correct. And they're doing some great things. I think that, you know, one of the things that we'll need to see is product differentiation in that space. So something that we do really well here in Australia is our traditional banks have great banking platforms and great banking apps. So until we see that differentiation of services, there's nothing really to pull people in. And Revolut started to do that. You can now trade within their platform, and you can get lounge passes when borders do open. So when you do get that differentiation of services, I think you'll see more people shift towards the neobanks. But that's been part of the reason that we haven't seen the same trajectory as in other markets, because our incumbents have great banking apps.
Do you think that we'll see other overseas neobanks come into this market? Is there enough for them to do business down here and offer new services?
I do know that N2, I've had a bit of a mental blank, was looking at the space for a while, the Belgian neobank, but I suspect that Revolut could be the only one for a while until borders really open and we start to get that travel happening again, which has been one of the drivers for people to move because of the currency fees that you get with a neobank versus a traditional bank.
I sort of wonder if, you know, we could be a small test market for innovative fintechs. I guess we'll have to wait and see.
We are a perfect test market, but not necessarily for neobanks that need size and scale. So we are seeing companies come here for exactly the same point, because we are fast adopters and we have a really strong financial services sector. So we are actually seeing that point, just not necessarily in the neobank sector.
That's right. It must be very attractive to come to the Australian market because of our really robust regulatory system down here.
It's a very attractive market, not only because of our robust regulatory system, but more because we're a gateway into Asia, and we also have a very traditional banking market that's very similar to the US and the UK. So you can actually test in market products that could actually easily be transferred into more sophisticated markets overseas.
Greg, to turn to you and the way lending is evolving, how do you see the lending market evolve with players like yours challenging the majors and offering new innovative products and services?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think lending's actually seen a lot of innovation over the last 9 years where Prospa started. I think you do have to break it up into segments. So, we're obviously in the small business segment. We actually appealed to a market that was severely underserved. So, the incumbent banking system was not necessarily designed to really serve that small business customer. It was a bit more on the kind of the consumer end, or the larger commercial or enterprise end is what it was built for. So we actually were able to use things like alternative data and give people outcomes that they weren't able to receive. I think what has been universal across all fintech lending solutions, and this can go towards an Afterpay, which is a quasi kind of payment lending product, is reducing the friction and making it simpler for the customer than what they were getting in their previous experiences is being done, and it's been highly, highly valued. So customers are certainly finding that if you can make it easier, quicker, simpler, faster, and I think everyone on this panel would talk to that in some way, shape, or form, that reducing friction is a key part of what they're doing to help. And I think when you reduce friction, it speeds up commerce, it makes a better financial ecosystem as well. So I guess on the lending front, just to put in perspective, we can talk to our evolution. When we first started, it would take you 8 weeks to get a decision from the bank, and that decision was usually a no. We can now make decisions as little as 13 seconds, and you've got your money, depending on whether it's MPP or not, even same day. So it's a significant step change in what we've seen on the lending front. I think also, as you said, there's new entrants coming. There's lending is one of those markets where people do enter and leave. It's a higher risk industry in some ways. So I think what we're certainly seeing is that overall just extended choice is certainly giving the consumer or the small business more, and that's giving them better offerings. I think it was mentioned prior that just from an adoption rate, people are far more willing to try a newer brand than they would have been in the past. I know when we started Prospa, the first question was, are you a bank? If you're not a bank, what are you? And that was a complex question. That's certainly not the case today. And just the knowledge, if you ask your average consumer, have they heard of many of the fintechs they have? So I think that's getting amazing cut through as well. So I think we've seen more choice, better experiences, better product selection. I think the only final thing I'd add to kind of what we are experiencing, I think it's true across all sectors of the fintech world. We certainly did see a lot of an unbundling of the banking system. So we saw different fintechs attacking a certain part of the banking system and doing that better. As they're actually starting to grow and getting loyal customers and very high NPSs and customers loving the products, they're often saying, what else can you give me? And we've seen an element of fintechs rebundling. So for instance, I actually see the Afterpay and Square as an example of that, of more a consumer and merchant attempt at kind of rebundling what is traditionally been something that only the banks were offering.
What's been, I guess, the response from the big banks to what you're doing? Has there been a competitive response?
Yeah, I think, look, in general, I think each bank's got its own strategy. So I think you have to kind of be careful in saying there's a banking response. I think as fintech started to evolve, many would look at partnering as a potential solution. I think acquisition was probably something where it was a bit more of a wait and see. So I think it was harder to pick the winners. So I think the view of the banks was rather let's see who the winners are, and then hopefully we can acquire them. I think unfortunately that the valuations did run away from them in certain instances, and it became a little bit more challenging. If you look at a group like CBA, for instance, they took multiple bets. So they invested in Klarna, they built their own product, and they tried to use regulation to kind of manage their competitive ability in that space. I think probably the area we'd see that where the banks might be the most challenged on would be just in terms of the potential loss of data. I think also in saying that, though, we do happen to be a country with an amazing banking system. I think the big four banks here do an exceptional job. So I know we talked about this being an exciting market for companies to test in, but we also happen to have a very well-functioning financial system. And if you go to other first world markets like the US, that's absolutely not the case. So it's also a very competitive and very competent commercial and banking system. So I think a lot of it is them building, expanding their own propositions and really looking to compete.
Yeah, I think we're much luckier down here with, really the one market than in the States with, more than 50 markets. It must be much harder to get traction in that market than down here.
Yeah, exactly. You've got multiple states with multiple regulation, and it results in interesting experiences for the customer.
So I'd like to throw open the discussion to everybody now. Looking forward to maybe 5 years into the future, how do you think the financial services system will look, and what will be the role of fintechs in the system? Patrick, maybe you want to start?
Yeah, no problem. Interesting to see if we still call them fintechs or there's another new buzzword that the market or that journalists and whatnot come up with. Yeah.
Or they'll just be financial services.
That's right, or just FinServes maybe. It's a little bit sexier. So yeah, look, the disruption will continue. Disruptions existed forever, right? Horse and cart to Ford motor car and whatnot. So disruption has just become probably a cooler word and a cooler term to use, and fintech sort of fits that. So I think certainly we'll continue to see the disruption happen, and I'm sure that there's technologies or lingo that is not being spoken about at the moment that will be fairly commonplace in that time. The world will likely become smaller again, even though it feels, we were talking about it before the webinar started, it feels enormous at the moment because we can't just jump on a plane, but I think that the world will become smaller, and particularly when you see those, acquisitions like Afterpay and of Afterpay by Square and Airwallex, expanding incredibly well internationally, and then, of course, Adyen as well, having their international footprint. I just feel that, it'll feel incremental, but when you look back 5 years ago, it'll be a huge step change.
What about you, Rebecca? You do have that sort of, overview of the system. What do you think's coming?
I think we've got two waves. I think we've got a wave of consumer adoption, particularly for our B2Cs. We're starting to see that already with the likes of Superhero, Athena, Afterpay being household names. And then I think we've got the wave of the B2Bs in the back end. So the rise of the Frankie financials that are really doing like eKYC and KYC and AML. And through that, you'll also see a rise in RegTech in that space. So I think we're going to have two separate waves, one particularly being fintech becoming more mainstream on a B2C level. And then B2B, I really do think we're going to see the next wave of fintechs in that really back-end space that we don't talk about that much at the moment. And obviously Creditor Watch is a great B2B fintech player, but we're going to see more in that like AML, KYC space, I think.
I've got an interesting question. Some years ago, there was a regulatory sandpit. Does that still operate and support fintechs to develop?
Yeah, so the regulatory sandbox was started quite a long time ago, and we didn't really have that much uptake. So last year, with the lobbying of FinTech Australia, we actually got the government to pass the enhanced regulatory sandbox, which created greater limits and a greater product suite that you could actually test within it. I think they've seen 7 or 8 companies go through that, which is more than we had with the last sandbox. And I still think there's lots of opportunities for companies to access that enhanced regulatory sandbox through ASIC. So highly recommend someone to do that, particularly in the insurtech space. We don't see many play in that space.
How do you get involved in the sandbox?
So the sandbox is an application process through ASIC. So if you go to the Innovation Hub, or if anyone wants a connection to the Innovation Hub, FinTech Australia is happy to provide it. But there's an application process, and you have to prove a range of different things about your business and you as individuals, as founders. So you've got to be fit and proper. It has to be innovative, and it has to have a benefit, potential consumer benefit for you to go through it. So there is an application process.
Thank you. Now let's move on to the optimum way for the incumbents to work with fintechs. Maybe I'll direct this question to you, Greg. How do you think that we will see different banks and fintechs work together in the future? What combinations will we see? What does it look like?
Yeah, I'm glad Rebecca touched on the kind of the back end versus the front end piece, because that's really important delineation. And I think there's a huge opportunity for fintechs on the back end to be working with the banking system. So Frankie One is a good example of that from an ID verification point of view. But these problems are huge problems to solve, and I know we're going to get into kind of the crypto side of things and kind of like decentralized technologies. And I'm, by the way, not an expert on it, so I'll probably steer a bit clear of that if it gets a bit too deep for me. But I think the ability to actually reduce the cost of the way banking has been done, or the way to actually improve their processes by working with fintechs, be it in things like back-end payments or back-end ID verification or process improvement, I think is going to be absolutely enormous. I think, look, on the front end, I think the banks have to decide, can they partner or will they be both partnering and competing? And I think they've had like an identity question that they have to still answer of these kind of friend or foe. And I don't think it's fully been answered yet, because especially if it's a fintech that is actually doing something that is core to the bank, I think that is harder for the banks to kind of wrap their head around the partnership. I think the second challenge is just operating rhythm. So I think one of the strengths that comes from the bank is their size. They are, they have very large balance sheets. They're well capitalized and they're well stocked. One of the challenges of banks is their size. So because they're so large and so disparate in how they're organized, it can actually become challenging. So the pace they want to work at, the requirements they might have. We have seen a lot of fintech partnerships, unfortunately, with the banks not get to full success, just because of different operating rhythms or different attitudes or different styles. So I do think that the continuous merger, I think we're also going to see some fintechs who are moving more and more into that banking world. So if you look at a group like PayPal, they're starting to be very broad in what they're trying to achieve. So I think it's both some of the fintechs turning into the banks in the future. I think we'll see the banks attempt to keep partnering with those that do what they do, but I think that'll be potentially a little bit more challenging. And then on the back end piece, I certainly see a huge opportunity for the fintech serving the banks as one of the largest customers they can take on for those products.
And no doubt, even if the tie-ups haven't worked, both sides have learnt something that they'll take through to
Absolutely.
the engagement, and that's part of the learning process. So Sam, I see you nodding your head as well. How do you think, as far as I know, none of the big banks have a digital wallet, so how would you work with them potentially?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it really depends on the segment, right? So if you think about how we work with different banks and incumbents, we've got really strong partnerships with 30 plus banks around the world. We have a global partnership with Visa. So we've actually, I think, taken a collaborative approach here, working in partnership with not just banks in Australia, but around the world. And then, scheme players like Visa as well. And part of I think the rationale, for both of us, obviously we benefit immensely from, their reach, the size, the infrastructure that they provide. And I think, part of the benefit they get is we're unlocking new segments for them, right? These are customer segments that they probably wouldn't have had access to and been able to support, right? If you think about what their focus areas are and what their longer term strategy might be, it might not be strategically important for them to go after the same set of customers that we're interested in. And, our mission is B2B. That's all we do. That's all we're focused on. And we don't touch consumers at all. And, for some banks, that might be a great way for them to access that B2B segment where they might not be able to provide the same level of service and care and attention that they might in other segments. So for us, it's definitely been a partnership approach, and we've had a lot of success partnering with not just banks in Australia but around the world as well.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see what happens to you in the future, given your very big capital raising and your potential. So Hayley, I'd now like to ask you potentially about things like the new payments platform and open banking. As an international player, how do you see those two platforms facilitating fintechs into the future?
Yeah, I think MPP is an interesting one, right? It's designed as a 24/7 digital platform. So with open banking, it's sped up the way that we can do transfer of funds bank to bank. So for our merchants who have a banking partner that are enabled for NPP, they're now getting real-time settlement. And we all know how important it is for merchants to receive settlement on time to help them with their cash flow management, etc. But we also think that's just the start. So with the now approved merger between BPay, FPOS and NPP to the newly named Australian Payments Plus, ideally that drives more innovation, right? So with Australian Payments Plus ideally being in a stronger position to develop and roll out new products and services to the benefits of not just the consumers and merchants, but overall innovation for Australia. So we're really interested to see how it progresses.
Who else has an opinion on what this means? I know, Rebecca, you've been pretty involved in all of this. What does the NPP or the new Australian Payments Plus and open banking mean for us all, really?
Well, I think they're two very separate things, and I think that if anyone talks about payment initiation in relation to open banking, they want to be able to access not just on the NPP, but on all the different payment rails, so you're not exclusively putting fast payments through the NPP. So the NPP is what Hayley spoke about, is our new fast payment rails equivalent to the UK's. At the moment, it's established by 13 major shareholders, and we had our first fintech actually connect directly to it yesterday with Wise announcing their connection. But I think it does mean a new wave of payments and how we do payments. So we're going to see the MPS, which is a 4-way payment initiation to allow direct debit through that, because it's a pull payment rather than a push payment. So it's all push payments, not pull payments, whereas open banking in Australia is more broadly than just open banking. So it is the consumer data right, which is a world leading system and regime that really does put the power of the data in the individual. We're rolling it out in banking, and we're just starting to see the first wave of that with, the 4 big data holders. The next wave of mutuals and mid-tier banks came online on 1 July. And we now have 12 accredited data recipients. Once we see a full ecosystem of fintechs and banks on board, that's when we're going to really see the innovation. But what is exciting is we're going to see other sectors come to play. So we're going to see energy, telco, and then hopefully followed by insurance and super. So it really will give you a full 180-degree perspective of your spending, your habits, and you will really be in control of your data. So it is very world leading, and it is, I think, a bit of a game changer.
Patrick?
Ali, I was just going to jump in. Thank you. And this is probably for you, Rebecca, first, but everyone else can jump in. Just on open banking or let's call it open data or CDR. Has the uptake been slower than everyone expected? And do we think we're going to get to it? When do we think we're going to get to a critical mass where consumers are comfortable with it and actually using it for more than just personal finance management?
So there is 2 critical steps before that even happens. And so the first critical step is getting the third set of the rules into force, and they allow data intermediaries to play in the system. So they allow the likes of TrueLayer, Basic, Additree, Yodlee to all engage within the system. And once that happens, that means fintechs such as maybe Prospa or Airwallex that haven't gone down the route of becoming an accredited ADR themselves can actually get their data through an intermediary. And so that will create critical mass of fintechs on the platform. And once that happens, that's when the government can actually go live with their planned education campaign. So there's no point at the moment educating consumers about CDR if there's not enough people that are playing within the system. So if I can't get all the data from all the different banks that I'm using, or if I can't use a platform easily because they're not accredited, they're still screen scraping, there's no point for the government to do that education campaign. So the first step is to get those intermediary rules through the system and allow other fintechs to connect through an intermediary. And then the second step would be an education campaign. And I don't think that's far away. I think we'll see those rules in about November this year. And then I suspect it'll be a fast trajectory from there. And I think what will really be the game changer, and I'll let the fintechs online talk about it, is when we can actually do action initiation and payment initiation rather than just read only, which we can do at the moment.
Great summary, thank you.
I see Greg and Sam nodding your head. What are your perspectives?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that I also see that as absolutely the game changer. So look, I think making consumer data more open is just better for the system in general. I'm not clear how much impact that will have. To Rebecca's point, there are actually ways to access a lot of that data as it stands today. I think just a fairer system with more information just will be a rising tide for all, and that's new players and incumbents. So I see it actually just growing a better system with better results. There will be a very interesting point where we can actually, and I think we've seen more of that in the UK, we can actually start to initiate and actually make payments, and that it actually is the kind of hopefully the next phase that the government gets to. I think that will allow products, experiences, and just a differential of what can be provided through things like digital wallets, through the payment system, and by different providers in a more significant way. And I think that will kind of democratize things even further. So I think it should only help. I can't see any negatives to that moving forward. I think it'll be highly regulated and it should be. But I think that moves definitely in the right direction. And I think we're probably all in this call hopeful that it just keeps moving in that direction.
Sam?
Yeah, I definitely agree, Greg. And I think we've seen some really interesting new models, right? With fintechs just using data to start with, and like alternative lending is a good example, with like Wayflyer and Clearco doing sort of e-commerce lending by consuming data from advertising sources, revenue data, this and that, and being able to come up with lending specifically for e-commerce merchants in a matter of hours, right? Which is absolutely game changing for some of these merchants, right? But I think, like, imagine the next level where you can actually then start, not just consuming the data, but then also initiating, payments back and forth. I think just we're going to see some really exciting software solutions here that are going to, I think, create new products and new industries, and hopefully a wave of new fintechs as well.
Now, we've still got 15 minutes left. Please feel free to post your questions and we'll have our experts answer them. This wouldn't be a fintech discussion if we didn't talk about the role of digital currencies. I'm interested in the panel's perspective on how digital currencies will play out. Who wants to tackle that first?
I'll jump in. I'll be the brave one. Go on, Greg.
I was going to say, look, the stat that just blew my mind, is that the adoption of cryptocurrencies is now growing at a faster pace than the internet. So I think, if you're not taking it seriously, you kind of have to now. Like, I think that's the kind of the first call out. I think the other thing that fascinates me is, like, there's digital currencies, right? So we'll take Bitcoin, Ethereum. There's lots of providers that are potentially looking at changing the monetary system. They're not connected to any sovereign states, and I think that's interesting. But I think there's definitely going to be some challenges about it. I mean, it's great to watch that El Salvador is now actually taking that as their currency. So we've got like a real live test case to go get a country run using crypto. So I think that's going to be fascinating to actually unwind. I think to me that the currency piece is a little bit more complicated in the sense of, like, is it now a currency? Is it an asset? I think it's grown at such an appreciation. It doesn't actually produce any income. So the question is, why is it growing at such a high pace? The argument of limited supply I find quite difficult, because it's an artificial supply. But I think the technologies that underpin these currencies are wildly exciting. So I think Sam would talk, or Hayley would actually talk to it better than me, and be deeper into payments. But certainly from a cost effectiveness point of view, and when you start thinking about things like smart contracts, your ability to transact, to identify all the inefficiency in the systems, that I think those technologies should reduce. I think that a more decentralized system is the direction the world will keep going in. And I think that is certainly something that digital currencies are encouraging and, like, forcing us to leap into. So overall, I think it's really positive. The currencies themselves I find a bit more complicated, but the technologies that underpin it, I think, are super exciting.
Did you want to add something, Patrick, over the top of that?
Look, I think everyone's got a friend who's deep into crypto. He won't be listening, but shout out to Teddy. And it's always interesting to see the optimism and the passion. And I think where crypto, and that's a very, very big catch-all term, is at the moment, it is very complicated, and unless you're doing your research, it's very hard to understand and to keep up with everything that's happening as well. What I really liked, and I think this was probably from reading the AFR and the Australian business section too often, is that I really like the whole concept of investing in the picks and shovels rather than in the coins themselves. So the platforms that actually facilitate the transactions or the blockchain technology itself to solve a real business issue or real issue for me is probably where I'm more interested in. I got burned on putting some money into Bitcoin about 3 or 4 years ago. It was a nice timely reminder that every time I put money into something, it other than Creditor Watch, of course, it goes the wrong way. So that's probably where I'm at.
Yeah, I'm far too much of a conservative investor to go there. Hayley, what's your view, with the international perspective that you've got?
Yeah, I mean, we view crypto or the currencies like anything else, and we base it on merchant demand. But from the Adyen point of view, we've seen very little demand for Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrency from both a consumer and merchant point of view. But it's very topical, so we'll continue to review it and support it if that's what merchants want.
One of the limitations, as I understand it, is it takes a lot of power to produce these coins. What's the solution to that? Is there a workaround? I don't know who wants to take that.
I mean, I actually was funny enough having this. My wife was having a debate with a friend of hers who's deeply into crypto and also is a huge environmentalist. So what has started happening though is, I believe with the ban in China, that actually was really beneficial. I think a lot of what the claim is that a lot of the negative environmental impacts are happening there, and then they're saying that they are looking to use clean energies to actually do this. So the more they can use, solar, whatever it might be, or I actually don't know which clean energies they're actually thinking about, but the more they can use clean energies and battery power to actually do this. So I think the argument is now, well, this is actually forcing further innovation in the green sector. So I think the argument that the crypto people are making, I think the fact that Elon Musk had to kind of walk back from his love of it, based on environmental reasons, certainly does say something. But again, I'm speaking as very uninformed, but that is what I understand of it at this point.
The other point that you raised about smart contracts, Greg, these are things that we've been talking about for a long time. How come they aren't already a normal part of the market?
Good question. I think change is hard, and I think to get people to change something that's already working is even harder. So I think one of the challenges and one of the benefits of Australia is we actually have a really good system. So good can kind of be the enemy of great. I mean, Sam was bringing up some great examples in countries where perhaps the system isn't as well set up, or even if we look at China, for instance, they've been able to bypass like Visa, Mastercard, because they had an underserved market that they could actually create true innovation in. So I think one of the areas we're seeing the most innovation actually happen is where the system is more broken, and there you're seeing the adoption pick up. We just talked about El Salvador, taking a cryptocurrency. That's partly because their current sovereign system isn't probably as strong as they'd like. That's certainly not something Australia would be taking on anytime soon. I think I think we should be careful, and I think I can't remember who this quote goes. I think it was Larry Summers, but he said, innovation always takes longer than you think to happen, but when it happens, it always happens faster than you ever thought it would. And at Prospa, that's certainly the mentality we have. And although it takes time, when it actually does happen, it feels like in an instant. So timelines can be deceptive as well.
Sam, could you accept digital currencies in your wallets?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's a lot, and I'm sure Rebecca can talk to this as well. But we partner with banks, as I mentioned, around the world, right? And regulation, for us needs to catch up, and provide those guide rails for fintechs like Airwallex, so that we can operate and accept these currencies as demanded by our customers, right? And so that's definitely one of the big challenges we're facing into, right? We're a global fintech, so when you onboard an Australian business, we give you access to banking capabilities or business account in the US, in Australia, in Europe, in Hong Kong, in a bunch of different countries all at once, right? Which is super exciting. But that means we do have to partner with banks that have global mandates and have different risk policies and risk appetites. And I don't think we've seen the consistency yet between governments and banks in their approach and their mindset to these currencies, and so until that changes and we get some more consistency, it's going to be hard for fintechs to really for fintechs, merchants, consumers to really take advantage of what this technology has to offer.
What's your perspective, Rebecca? You must have a view also, I guess, of the regulatory structures that would need to be put in place, to roll out a national Australian digital currency. Is that part of the future?
Well, it is definitely part of the future, but we've got big problems in relation to the uncertainty on crypto regulation in the country. I think it's been talked about a lot in the press lately, and the government is looking more and more at what kind of market license it can bring in, because a regular Australian market license won't work and an AFSL won't work. So it's going to have to be something very particular, or we're going to need to look at changing the Australian markets license to enable them to operate with a regulatory framework here. We've got a long way to go. I think the market, while there's a huge amount of adoption, there's not a huge amount of sophisticated knowledge in the space. And so there are lots of blockchain specialists and lots of crypto specialists, but we have a long way to educate the relevant regulators in relation to it so that we can see the right frameworks be put into the place. I think we'll see a central digital currency sooner rather than later. But we also have to remember that we can't leave the vulnerable behind. And so, when we talk about crypto and we talk about a cashless society, they will happen, but the pace of change might be slower than everyone thinks, because we have to remember that there is a whole lot of vulnerable consumers still in market. So, cash can't disappear until everyone's been trained on how to $10 notes and $50 notes work on your phone. So when we think about either the elderly or the vulnerable, we can't actually completely remove cash or move as quickly to a central digital currency, but we will see it happen. But the removal of traditional cash or cashless society will happen slower because of the vulnerable customers.
So we've still got a few minutes left, and what I thought I'd do is just go around everybody and ask you for some final comments about how you see the future of fintechs playing out, and then I'll throw back to Patrick to end the session. So I'll start with you, Greg. How do you think that it'll all play out? Where to from here?
A big question, Ellie. Thanks. Look, I do think we will see more of the funneling that I talked to. I think you'll see more and more winners emerge. I think you'll see those winners get stronger and stronger. I think you'll see them doing more and more things. I think the thing that excites me is, financial services is just such an enormous space. There's so many problems to tackle, and it's a vital thing to keep improving on. So I think the fact that we're consistently seeing more and more startups, I think, as Pat said, 9 years ago when we started, the term fintech hadn't actually been created yet. So now it's common language, and I think just the acceptance of challenging the status quo in the fin services world is really, really vital. And I think the more fintechs we can have, the better. And some of them will succeed, some of them will get absorbed through M&A, and some of them will fail. But I think all of them will continue to produce a better financial system for the world. So I'm really hopeful for continued innovation.
Thanks so much, Greg. What about you, Sam?
Yeah, I think seeing sort of three big trends, and very excited for all three of them. But I think that the shift in consumer behaviour, I think that everyone's mentioned, I think that's going to continue and accelerate. I think more competition, which is great, right? I think Revolut's landed here in Australia, as Rebecca mentioned. Like I think the rise of fintech and increasing competition is going to be good for consumers and businesses, just generally. So I think that's been awesome. And then like one thing we are seeing is just like this desire to go global, right? Where in Australia, Australian businesses are able to kind of interact now, I think, in a really efficient way with consumers, suppliers, vendors, employees, right? Distributed workforces, where you've got staff around the world now, and that's become viable. So I think that desire to go global is just going to continue.
And you, Hayley?
Yeah, I fully agree with Sam and Greg. I think it's all about the consumer and the focus and the increased and welcome competition in the market. But when I think about on a product point of view, we're seeing with the coronavirus of the growth of things like contactless e-commerce, so QR codes or pay at table, and I think we'll continue to see technologies like payment links, etc., growing when consumers just want to have a seamless and a hygienic way to do payments in the future. But the fact is we don't really know what lies ahead, right? So that's the challenge and opportunity for all of us fintechs, and I think it's important for us to build products that our merchants can use now and grow with and use in the future. So exciting times.
Thanks, Hayley. And finally, you, Rebecca.
Mute. I think we always do that in these. I think it's a very exciting time for fintech more broadly, and I have to echo Sam's comments about more Australian fintech scaling overseas. FinTech Australia is now plugged into Austrade, and we have an Austrader within our team. And there's more and more fintechs looking for that service to launch in traditional markets, but we're also seeing fintechs look at markets such as Vietnam, India, Thailand. So we're seeing a little bit of a change in markets that our fintechs want to launch in, which is incredibly exciting. But I do think we are going to continue to see the rise of fintechs, as I spoke before, in consumer awareness. So there's going to be more household names, and that's going to really drive the growth of fintech more broadly in the country.
Thank you. And over to you, Patrick, to close out the session.
So what I was thinking is I messed up the start broadcast at the beginning. So for everyone thinking if they were the only one to sort of jump into the session and we'd already started, no, that was my fault, and I'll own up to that. So I might just sort of do the intro as an outro, if that's all right. Look, in terms of the future, I think, short term, coming out of the pandemic, getting businesses in particular back on track is what I'm really conscious of. Not that Creditor Watch is going to do it, but I think it's a whole of industry play, and it's there's been a huge amount of support from the government, of course, and the bigger banks and the ATO, as we know. So I think I'm hoping that the speed at which payments can happen is really important. Settlement times being reduced is incredibly powerful for smaller businesses in particular, to be able to make payments of whatever it might be to their suppliers, or it's putting food on the table, paying school fees, paying mortgage, etc. Having access to capital from a lending perspective also extremely important. Greg touched on it. It was 10 years ago, 11, how long have you been? 11 years, Greg, that Prospa's been around, and from 8 weeks to wait for a no, how many businesses went out of business in that time waiting, and then ultimately got a no. So I think fintech has played an incredibly important role in the Australian economy, and no, it'll be even more important over the next I think 6 to 12 months as we try to push out of this recession and significant downturn. So that's my thoughts on that. And then as the outro as well, just I wanted to say big thank you to all of our panelists here, Ali included. A huge amount of work has gone into the white paper for the future, or the Future of Fintech white paper. If you haven't got access to it, we will send it out with the a bit of a summary of today's webinar. If not, you can jump on the website and download it if you can't wait for that. Hopefully you will go and do that. It's on creditorwatch.com.au. As we sort of touched on, Creditor Watch has been playing in this space for a very long time before I think fintech was even a term. providing, you know, the back-end support from a, you know, whether it's AML, KYC, credit decisioning, or just the automation and real-time access of data for, you know, particularly for B2B transactions. You know, and we continue to do that and support that space. We do have the product suite here. I'm not going to go through that again. I've already done that. Some key highlights, and of course, I think the one big thing that I really want to talk about is Creditor Watch will be releasing what we've named the Business Risk Index. So please do have a look on the website. Keep an eye out in your inboxes for that. It's going to be, you know, an Australian first in terms of looking at the probability of, you know, insolvency and default at a regional level over 300 regions, you know, across Australia. Incredibly powerful insights for anyone that is in, you know, the B2B, whether it's credit risk space or even looking to expand. It'll be a great tool to use from a marketing perspective to understand where there's opportunity. And Sam spoke about segments before, how to take advantage of specific segments that may you know, need access to your tools that you are providing. But other than that, as always, please don't be shy to contact us, speak to us at Creditor Watch. Plenty of different ways to do that. So that is probably it from my long-winded intro outro. A big thank you to Alexandra Cain, Sam, Hayley, Rebecca, and Greg today, but also for your input into that white paper. And a big thank you to everyone at home, or potentially if you're in Queensland and the other lucky states, if you're in the office. Thank you all. Stay safe, and we will see you very soon, no doubt.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.